welcome to everybody. Um, so why have I done this talk? You know, there's been a lot of discussions around open source and sustainability for quite a number of years. In fact, if you were here at last year's event, you would have heard people talk about it as well. And this is a subject that doesn't go away, of course. It's a subject, if anything, that's growing. You know, we have the spilt coffee cup here. I'm very confused because there's two different slide presentations going on. So, I mean, everyone's heard of the OpenSSL problem, Heartbleed, Log4j, curl, and of course, you know, I'm sure there are other examples as well. But what is it that we're actually talking about? So when we talk about sustainability, I mean, if you talk to people who maybe aren't in our world of open source, sustainability means something along the lines of, you know, let's be ecological, let's recycle. But that, of course, isn't really what we're talking about, right? So let's be clear about what we're talking about. Okay, so initially, you're going to be thinking, well, we're talking about financial sustainability. So I'm an independent consultant. If I don't have clients, I go out of business. That's not very sustainable, right? But that doesn't really matter because I produce, let's say, hot air. But you guys, you're producing solutions, right? And if you go out of business, who's going to keep those solutions running? Who's going to update them, okay? So, you know, finance is a big question around sustainability. But so too is your mental health, right? So a lot of the criticisms that have come out of the recent subjects, such as OpenSSL, Log4j, and others, has not been so much focused on the finance aspect. It's been focused on the mental stress that's being placed on very small teams, sometimes people who are working kind of as a sideline, a hobby, an evening work. It could be their day work, but it's, you know, they're very small, and you suddenly have really big companies and everyone breathing down their necks to get fixes done. It's a huge mental stress. You get burnout. If you're in the DevRel world, you'll understand about that as well. So there's a sustainability around the community. And of course, we now have an added question of sustainability, which is the whole regulatory side of things. So everyone, of course, has a CRA on their lips, but you know, there's a whole raft of different regulations that are coming down the line if they don't already exist. So when we talk about sustainability, we're really talking about a family of different topics which come together and impact what we're doing in a software or an open source environment, right? And we know that there is lots of debate about this. So as I mentioned, there's been talks. So Toby Langell, you may know his name. I think he was here last year. We were dressed pretty much the same, so people kept confusing us. But he was saying, hey, you know, why doesn't the software industry give 0.1% of their revenues to open source maintainers? And that would be like $1 billion for open source maintainers. I mean, it's a lovely idea, right? You also have other people, such as the VP of infrastructure in Google, talking at the Open UK's conference a couple of years ago, saying, look, security with open source is a question. We need to take the stress away from these very small teams and have a software library, a library of software that is curated. And he went further than this. He also suggested that these curated libraries of software, where the software would be updated, it would be patched, etc., that would be done through government bodies, as an example. Okay, so again, big discussions by some very, let's say, well-known, influential people around the subject. But I'm wondering if we're really understanding the same problem, or if we're understanding the same question in the same manner. Hence the title of this talk. Does open source really have a sustainability problem? So I think when we look at this, and I'm going to kind of follow on a little bit on the financial aspect, because when we look at finance, obviously a lot of things follow through from finance. And I've taken GitHub as my source of truth. It may not be the right source of truth, but it's obviously it's a huge platform that a lot of people use. And the statistics, the numbers I've drawn here, are coming from the Octoverse report of last year. So they're pretty up to date, right? All the numbers in yellow that you'll see, these are numbers taken directly from that report. Okay, the other numbers are ones that I've calculated based on those. So we see how many developers there are or contributors there are, 5.2 billion contributions, right, to over 1 billion public repositories. I mean, these are huge numbers. But then you also look that there's a huge amount of private repositories, right? So in fact, what we see from the numbers is that a vast majority of the contribution activity goes towards the private repositories. And the assumption is that most private repositories are company-led. Now, of course, that is an assumption. And there's many public repositories that are company-led and many private repositories that are led by just individuals wanting to kind of experiment on a piece of code. But the assumption is private repositories are mainly company repositories. Now, industry patterns tend to suggest that if you have 100 million developers, about 70% of those 100 million developers are probably going to be sponsored in some way through corporate entities, right? They're going to be paid by corporates. It might be directly or indirectly, okay? And we can also assume that about 1/3 of those paid developers are not just working on their company projects, but also working on the public repos, okay? So if we take all of those numbers and play around with them in the right way, because statistics never lie, what we see, and we'll get to it, is that around 90% of contributions going into GitHub projects are coming from paid developers. So these are not hobbyists, they're not students, they're not people doing it at the weekend for a bit of fun. Okay, so that's a huge amount. So, but is finance really the question? I don't know, but let's carry on. So if we change the question, we say, well, okay, we've had a look at the money side, or at least the contribution side, and we think most developers, at least on GitHub, are paid developers in one way or another. But let's have a look at who's actually making open source, right? So obviously you have the big corporations, right? You have Meta, you have Orange, you have Samsung, Mercedes-Benz, IBM. I mean, you pretty much any company you want to name these days is producing open source in one way or another and using. Then, of course, you have the open source, I'm going to say predicated, the open source companies themselves. XWiki, they spoke earlier, Bluemind, Linagora, Murina. We saw Marina earlier as well. These are companies who are making their business out of open source. The public bodies and institutions, so Ville de Paris. I don't think Philippe is here with us today, but part of OW2, they have the Lutest project, fantastic project, of course. We know that there are other towns in Europe who are using open source and doing lots of great stuff with it. So lots of open source from public institutions. SMEs and freelancers, you guys, maybe some of you anyway, I'm going to call you the indies. So you're avant-garde rock stars. Hobbyists and students. Okay? And then, of course, we got some VCs. I kind of added those in as a bit of an afterthought, because when we're talking about stakeholders, you can't not talk about open source in a larger scale and ignore kind of venture capital. But in reality, as we'll see on the next slide, I don't think it has a big difference or big impact on what I'm saying here. And I'm going to have to speed up. So lots of different actors within the open source world, right? And everyone's got their different motivations. Okay, so companies, and this is where I lump in the VCs as well. Companies are doing open source because it answers their business objectives. It's going to give them competitive advantage, or it's going to lower costs, or for another reason. You know, companies aren't doing it just for the fun of doing it. So they have a motivation. It's part of their business strategy, or it should at least be part of their business strategy. Otherwise, I don't know why they're doing it. You guys, the rock stars, the indies, okay, you want to showcase your skills. You want to build your portfolios. You have a personal interest. And I'm going to say you want to earn some drink money. Maybe that should be for the students. Obviously, if you're an independent and you want to earn money, maybe you also have structured a company, in which case open source is part of your company objective, which is why I separate companies and indies here. Hobbyists, learning, fun, community, beer money again, maybe. So everyone's got their different motivations, right? And if these motivations aren't aligned, why should we expect the remuneration to be aligned around them? And since finance and value are what we talk about when we talk about sustainability often, but not always, you start to see that, hang on, maybe the argument, the discussion is more nuanced than what we have been discussing, generally speaking. So let's acknowledge some hidden truths here, right? Even free contributions have hidden benefits. Okay, and often those hidden benefits are the ones that people are actually targeting. Okay, so all these participant types that we've seen, they all have their legitimate self-interest. They're not doing this just for fun. And this is a big argument I'm saying, this altruistic, apparently altruistic behavior that you might believe happens a lot in the open source world. I'm not sure if it's as altruistic as we think. So if we look at benefits, okay, so brand visibility, reputation building, it's free marketing. Community enthusiasm, feedback, input, that's great. We love communities, right? Free labor. I'm being a bit cynical, of course. Access to cutting-edge knowledge, reviews from our peers, feedback from our peers, but it's free learning. Collective influence, networking, communities, organic growth, but it's coalition building. Wow, cool. So community participation is giving us a strategic investment. Okay, what about the value of freedom? Well, open source, it's digital sovereignty, it's freedom. Okay. Freedom to change vendor, but I'm avoiding lock-in so I can reduce my costs. Freedom to swap between solutions. I'm also avoiding lock-in, and I'm also choosing the best bang for my buck. I want the solution that answers my needs for the least cost, right? Freedom to adapt the solution, best fit. Freedom to keep the data. Time is money, except that now it's data is money. Freedom to control my technology stack, i.e. strategic independence, business independence. If you're a business, it's the business independence, and if you're a government, it's strategic or national independence. It's the ability to have exports, have taxes on those exports. You know all the questions around the big GAFAMs and the tax games that they play. So again, money is the great motivator of freedom, right? I'm not sure how many of us are doing freedom for freedom. What about the funding programs? So, there's been quite a lot of talk, quite a lot of ideas from various companies about how to answer this sustainability problem. Okay, so there are some big platforms where a lot of developers go. I'm not going to name the platforms. I'm sure you can name them yourselves. So let's think about those funding programs. Okay, so these funding programs, they're providing an easy monetization route for developers. What does that do? It creates a strong incentive for the developers to stay and use those platforms. Yes, a developer can go to any other platform, but why go to another platform when on this platform, I've got an easy monetization route? So I'm being locked in. I'm not being locked in physically, I'm going to say by that, but it's a financial, nice lock-in in some ways. Size matters. Obviously, the bigger you are, the more attractive you are. It creates a certain gravity. I wanted to put black hole here, but I don't think it gave the right message, because black hole seems to be something that sucks in everything else and it all disappears, right? But obviously, that's not the message we're giving here. It's the notion of huge mass attracts everything else. You're not going to go to small platforms when all the mass is on this big platform. Fear of missing out. Networking opportunities, answering the objectives that you originally set, which is to have visibility on these platforms. Size matters again. Okay, so the bigger we are, the harder it is for the competing platforms to poach our projects. Projects don't want to leave, so it creates a kind of virtual moat. And the thriving ecosystem, very much related to the gravity, of course, is generating enterprise sales. So these platforms, again, they are attracting big companies who then pay enterprise fees, of course, maybe for their private repos. So the more active projects you have, and this is nearly the end of this slide, it's a bit of a long slide. The more active the projects are, the more data you gain. Now, a platform with many millions of developers, many millions of projects, they have a lot of data, right? Which can do some interesting things for AI, which they can then sell. Virtuous cycle. So framing funding programs from certain platforms is missing the business calculus. For certain, it's of benefit to developers. But don't be naive in thinking they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. I'll let you guys read this. This is a quote from Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, which was a book printed a long time ago. This would appear as individual altruism, but it would be brought about by gene selfishness. Replace gene by corporate or capitalist, and individual as company. You get the idea. So what am I saying here? And I'm going to so overrun. Sorry. The real question here is not whether we have or don't have a sustainability crisis. It's whether there's a disconnect in expectations. So companies, they're doing stuff with open source. Sometimes they're not making money. Are their business models adapted? Sometimes they're doing stuff with open source and they're not feeding back for whatever reason. Is this short-termism? Is it KPI chasing? So companies are doing all sorts of things, right? The rock stars, hey, the rock stars, they're out there. They're on GitHub, they're on GitLab, they're doing their own projects, they're hosting their own stuff. They're just going for it, and it's fantastic. But is it clear in their mind what they're expecting back for this? Right? Do they have a purpose that answers what possibly is a business question that they should have asked and didn't? And what about the hobbyists? You know, hey, should I be paying a hobbyist if I'm a company? I mean, they're doing it for fun, right? It's their hobby. I mean, I don't get paid to do whatever my hobby is. I go and play with fish in a pond or whatever, right? I mean, if you want to pay me to do that, hey, that'd be nice, because ponds are expensive. And some of you build Lego, and I'm sure you're not getting paid to play with Lego. So the question here is twofold. And I've kind of put this in at the end because I think these two remarks actually cover the three categories here. Do these actors have realistic expectations of what they're trying to do? And are those expectations clear, not just to others, but more importantly, to themselves? So when we talk about a sustainability crisis, I think we need to reframe the debate, because I'm not saying that developers have problems and that open source projects, you know, end up being ignored and unloved. But I think the question is bigger, and I think it's an expectation problem from companies expecting unrealistic things, from developers expecting unrealistic things and not being clear, etc., etc. So today's conference was meant to talk about AI, right? So I guess I had to do a slide about AI, because otherwise that's not good. You're all expecting it, to talk about expectations. Okay, so does open source make sense in an AI world? The question there is, where are business models going? Where is business? Where is finance going? So I think we're already seeing this notion that platform economics are taking over from product economics. The value is shifting away from the licensing of code towards the control of platforms and the monetization of data flows. Touching on data flows, data economics over license economics. Training databases, creating the model weights is more important these days, I would argue, than your traditional code licenses. Again. The final one, still work in progress mentally, but tokenized value exchange. And what am I really talking about here is, when we look at AI, the calculations that AI is doing, often we talk about how many tokens per second it's generating, right? Tokens cost money. We know that digital transactions are on their way. Digitalized Europe, we already have decentralized platforms and smart contracts. So are we at the cusp of blurring the traditional model of value exchange through a notion of token exchange? So the question is not so much whether open source survives AI. The question is how it evolves to meet these new economic models. Final slide, I promise. So this is a kind of a sum-up slide. It's a call to action. There's a couple of messages in here, well, a few messages that I'm going to pass. So the first one is, stop expecting altruism where none exists. Align your expectations with your motivations. Be clear in why you're doing open source and what you are expecting from it, because it's only from that clarity that you will be able to align, and I hope the next point is the right one. It's only from that clarity that you will be able to build your business model, your sustainable business model that is based on a value exchange that profits both sides of the equation. From the company perspective now, embrace the strategic nature of open source participation. Okay, we've all heard too many companies taking open source and they don't participate back. It's not good. And it's again for companies, and this is especially important now that we're coming into the age of CRA and stuff like that, is remember that supply chain resilience is a corporate responsibility. I would go further than that, and hopefully the first point on this, no, but next point. So I've got two sum up points here. Really, I should have inversed these. The first sum up point is the expectation gap hides a value exchange imbalance. So when we talk about sustainability, what we're really talking about is a gap in expectation. Big companies expecting to use open source for free but not give back. Smaller companies having a certain expectation that maybe that life would be easy or yada, 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 whatever the expectation is, or a different expectation from the big companies that they're not getting. So think about the expectations and motivations. The final point here links into that last star. I would say that sustainability issues arise from corporate irresponsibility. So hopefully now all the indies in the audience that I've annoyed won't come and attack me after the talk. Okay? If you are running a company and you are using open source and you are not feeding back to that in some way, I would say that you are irresponsible as a corporate leader, because it means you are not securing your supply chain, which in some cases might be critical to what you're doing, and you're creating problems for yourself, and that's completely ignoring the whole regulatory side of things with the CRA. So hopefully this talk will have given you some food for thought. I will be happy. No, I'm going to hide now so you can't all ambush me. No, I'll be happy to discuss this. And again, let's think about the sustainability question from the notion of value exchange and why companies should be doing it and why they should be participating and how we can help that. Let's not be naive about this question, okay? Just saying companies should give $1 billion to maintainers, I don't know if that's very realistic, even if the thought is lovely, right? So I'm probably quoting Toby a little bit out of context there, and he's not here to defend himself. So his message was kind of broader than that. But let's be clear on what we're discussing here. Anyway, so thank you very much.